Go ahead and apologize to your friends and family right now, because the rest of 2026 is actively trying to destroy your sleep schedule. The RPG lineup coming down the pipeline for the back half of this year is so stacked, it's borderline irresponsible. We're talking massive world enders, deep tactical grinds, and digital black holes that will swallow your free time whole. Let's break down 15 massive upcoming RPGs that look completely unforgettable.
You think you have the strength to protect the weak? Then prove to me these are more than
Atlas
empty
took
words.
a long look at their legendary Persona formula and decided to ask the ultimate question. What if we swap out the high school midterms, the trendy Tokyo cafes, and the teenage angst for a literal medieval royal election campaign? Metaphor ReFantazio is an absolute masterclass in style, featuring a user interface that is so ridiculously clean and visually explosive that just opening your equipment menu looks cooler than pulling off a maximum combo in most modern action games. You play as a nameless protagonist traveling across a fractured fantasy world in a giant mechanical gauntlet runner, which is basically a walking mobile fortress with legs trying to win the hearts and minds of the public because the king got assassinated, and now the crown goes to whoever gets the most public votes. You're managing a strict calendar, deciding whether to spend your limited free days bonding with a companion to unlock a new rock and roll armored archetype class, or using your time to increase your royal virtues so the local townsfolk don't think you're a complete loser. The combat is this brilliant, lightning-fast hybrid where you can casually smack weak enemies to pieces in real time in the overworld, but the moment you hit a tough monster, it transitions smoothly into a deep turn-based battle, where positioning and exploiting weaknesses determine whether you survive or get absolutely flattened by a giant bird with a terrifyingly human face.
Final Fantasy returns to its roots with cinematic pixel art.
Square Enix finally woke up and realized that if you slapped their gorgeous HD 2D art style onto a classic turn-based combat system, JRPG fans will collectively throw their wallets at the screen. Final Fantasy Resonance takes the core story of Brave Exvius, which was previously trapped behind the screen of your phone in mobile gacha purgatory, and rebuilds it into a massive, traditional console RPG. You're following Rain and Laswell, two knights who get absolutely dismantled in the first 10 minutes by a giant menacing guy in black armor named Veritas of the Dark, who casually shatters the earth crystal right in front of them. The gameplay is pure classic comfort food, but it borrows that incredibly satisfying stagger and break system, where you hunt down elemental weaknesses to shatter an enemy's defense and string together massive screen-shaking resonance attacks. The absolute best part is how they handle the legacy roster. Instead of opening a real-life banking app to pull for rare heroes, you summon visions, which are essentially echoes of legendary Final Fantasy characters, to fight alongside your party, providing insane strategic depth without any of the predatory microtransactions. Add in optional endgame showdowns with the legendary Ultima weapon, a lethal coliseum packed with brutal monsters, and the wandering multi-armed swordmaster Gilgamesh showing up out of nowhere to wreck your team, and you've got a massive nostalgic pixel art adventure that respects your time, your brain, and your bank account.
Place host to the Heroic Games, the winner of which is granted one
Look,
wish.
if you spent 300 hours arguing about which house was best in 3 houses, Intelligent Systems is about to hijack your free time all over again with Fire Emblem Fortune's Weave on the Switch 2. This isn't just some random spin-off either, it's a full-blown future sequel set in the exact same universe, complete with a significantly more grown-up Sothis who is apparently done hanging out as a glowing child in your brain, and is ready to cause some real cosmic problems. The whole setup this time drops you straight into the capital of the Dagdan Empire, where everyone is obsessed with the Dagosian games. This is basically a massive high-stakes gladiator tournament where the grand prize winner gets a single wish granted, which is a fantastic narrative excuse to bring together a cast of characters who are all deeply traumatized, politically desperate, or just hiding massive secrets. Right out of the gate, you get to choose between 4 distinct main characters to champion throughout the tournament, and each one comes with their own unique entourage and bizarre quirks. Take Kai, for example, a guy trying to win the games to break his imprisoned dad out of jail, who goes into combat riding a literal flying camel that looks suspiciously like a prehistoric ostrich and can casually leap over massive battlefield barriers to flatten unsuspecting archers. Then there's an advisor named Bonaparte who serves a queen in a kingdom where the written word is illegal, which means this absolute madman has literally memorized the entire history of his civilization just to do his job.
神や霊京都平坂学園への
acting as a spiritual successor and standalone sequel to Kyoto Xanadu. This game moves the supernatural chaos to a modern-day version of Japan where Kyoto has mysteriously become the nation's capital. You take control of Rei Kamiya, an otherwise ordinary high school kid who suddenly awakens to the otherworldly Xanadu phenomenon and gets promptly transferred to Hirosaka Academy, which is essentially a front for teenagers training to conquer hostile labyrinth dimensions. What makes this game stand out right away is its incredibly weird but brilliant 2.5D combat system. When you're exploring the massive labyrinths hidden beneath the academy, the game plays like a classic hyper-fast side-scrolling 2D action platformer, where you slash through waves of creep. But the moment you open specific dimensional gates within the dungeon, the camera pivots into full 3D arena combat, forcing you to unleash precise technical dodges, aerial combos, and flashy skill attacks to take down massive bosses. Outside of the dungeons, you're forced to manage your daily life using action cards before class, which dictates whether you're actually studying to raise your social stats or just goofing off to build your friendship levels with your classmates. After school, you get to explore a beautifully realized digital recreation of Kyoto, hitting up tourist spots, buying gear in the shopping districts, or customizing your soul device with guardian cards that slap elemental attributes like fire and ice onto your weapons.
Guess I'd better
If you've ever looked at a Disgaea game and thought, man, I love the absolute brain-melting numbers and the ridiculous anime nonsense, but I really just want to actively hit things with an axe instead of waiting for my turn, then Nippon Ichi Software basically read your mind. Disgaea Mayhem completely ditches the old turn-based tactical spreadsheets and morphs into a full-on chaotic action RPG where you take control of a tired mercenary named N.A., who gets dragged into a turf war by a demon overlord named Tichelle. And what's the world-ending threat that kicks off this whole high-stakes adventure? Someone ate her favorite pudding out of the fridge. Seriously, you're fighting through hordes of underworld freaks to reclaim a stolen snack, and honestly, that's exactly the kind of unhinged energy we want here. The genius part is how they managed to cram all the absurd, bloated progression systems of a classic Disgaea title into a real-time hack and slash. You're still going into the item world, which is basically a chaotic gauntlet inside your own gear to level up your swords and bows, and you're still grinding your way toward a ridiculous level cap of 9,999. The screen gets choked with colorful numbers, flashy skills, and absolute visual noise as you min-max your character to deal literal hundreds of millions of damage per second. It feels like a beautiful power trip where the game actively encourages you to break its mechanics over your knee, making the transition to real-time action feel incredibly natural without losing a single drop of that classic grinding-obsessed identity. You have to love a game that looks at modern, convenient open-world design, smiles politely, and then kicks it down a deep well. Dragon's Dogma 2 is an absolute chaotic engine of emergent storytelling where everything that can go wrong absolutely will, and the game will happily watch you suffer with a smirk on its face. You play as the Horizon, which sounds incredibly fancy, until you realize your primary job description is walking through the woods while your AI pawns talk endlessly about ladders, point out obvious rocks, or complain that their previous master didn't pick enough weeds. The combat is incredibly physical and satisfying. If you're playing a thief, you're literally climbing up a giant griffin's leg to stab it in the neck, only for that griffin to suddenly take off and fly across half the map, with you still hanging onto its feathers for dear life while your stamina bar rapidly drains. And don't even get me started on the fast travel, or lack thereof. You board a slow-moving ox cart to cross the country, choose to doze off to skip the trip, and wake up halfway through because a random minotaur decided to use your cart as a bowling ball. It's a game of absolute physical comedy where you can pick up a goblin and throw it off a cliff at another goblin, or accidentally contract a weird disease called Dragon's Plague from an online pawn, go to sleep at an inn to save your progress, and wake up to a cutscene showing your favorite AI buddy just murdered an entire major city while you were resting.
Before we get to the next game, let me tell you about ENEBA. ENEBA is a marketplace with games, gift cards, and gaming content, but at a better price. For example, you can grab stuff like Nintendo eShop, $50 card key for just $45. But here's the crazier part. There is also an app called SnackZ where you can play mobile games, earn coins, and redeem it for almost any gift card you can think of. Or you can even cash it out to ENEBA. So technically you are paying almost nothing, and they already paid out over $1.2 million in rewards to users. So if you want to check it out, make sure to use the QR codes on the screen, the link in the description, and for SnackZ use code SwitchPlanet for a $10 welcome bonus. Let's get on to the next game.
When you get Masato Kato, the literal mastermind behind Chrono Trigger, to write a time-traveling JRPG, you already know your brain is about to get thoroughly twisted into a pretzel. Another Eden Begins brings the massive, sprawling world of the mobile classic onto consoles and PC as a premium, fully voice-acted epic, and it is a massive win for anyone who hates gacha mechanics but loves incredible storytelling. The game kicks off in a peaceful little village with our protagonist, Aldo, and his sister, Fina. But things immediately go off the rails when the Beast King shows up, kidnaps your sister, and accidentally kicks Aldo through a literal tear in space-time, dropping him a casual 800 years into the future. From there, you are launched into an absolute massive adventure across the past, present, and future, trying to piece reality back together. The combat runs on a highly strategic, old-school turn-based command system where party synergy is absolutely everything. You have a massive roster of nearly 20 unique companions to recruit, and victory depends entirely on balancing your attackers, buffers, and healers to chain together elemental weaknesses. The absolute highlight of the battle system is the Another Force gauge. You build this up by landing solid hits, and when you activate it, time literally stops, allowing your entire party to bypass turn orders and rain down an ungodly amount of uninterrupted cosmic violence on whatever poor boss is standing in your way. But the real kicker that will destroy your sleep schedule is the New Game Plus mode. Look, we've all seen the jokes about steampunk Pinocchio going full John Wick, but the reality is that Lies of P is one of the tightest, most satisfying games in its lane, period. It drops you into the city of Krat, which is essentially what happens when a beautiful Victorian metropolis gets overrun by automated puppets that suddenly decided to murder everyone in sight. You're playing as P, a remarkably well-dressed mechanical boy with a modular arm that hooks onto enemies trying to find your creator Geppetto. Now, on paper, it looks exactly like Bloodborne's gothic cousin, but once you pick up a controller, you realize it's doing something entirely its own. The combat is built around a punishingly precise, perfect guard mechanic that requires you to memorize enemy attack rhythms down to the exact millisecond, shattering their weapons and opening them up for brutal, fatal strikes. But the real star of the show is the weapon assembly system, which lets you literally detach the blade of a giant wrench and slap it onto the handle of a rapid swinging rapier. You end up creating these bizarre custom instruments of destruction that change how you approach every single encounter. On top of that, you've got the P-Organ system, which is a hilarious name for a genuinely fantastic upgrade tree, letting you customize your dodge frames, your item capacity, and your stagger windows to match your exact playstyle. It's dark, it's incredibly tense, and it weaves this constant narrative tension where you have to choose whether to lie to the people you meet to protect their feelings, which slowly makes you more human.
Comes to Nintendo Switch 2. An ancient power has awakened.
Jagex took a massive gamble by taking one of the most iconic, click-heavy MMORPGs of all time and turning it into a co-op, open-world survival game. And honestly, RuneScape Dragonwilds is an absolute blast that will trigger intense nostalgia for anyone who spent their childhood cutting down yew trees. Dropping you and up to 3 friends into the untamed hostile continent of Ashenfall within the world of Gielinor, the game essentially plays like RuneScape met Valheim and decided to crank up the danger. You start out naked and afraid, forced to punch trees and forage for resources, but the game quickly opens up into a deeply addictive survival gameplay built entirely around leveling up your classic skills. Every single thing you do boosts a specific stat, whether you're building massive fortified bases to safeguard your hard-earned loot, planting crops with the farming skill, or running around using magic spells to chop down trees faster. The combat replaces the old browser game clicking with fluid active survival mechanics, where your spell casting utility is just as important for surviving a freezing night as it is for blasting a skeleton out of existence. True to its name, the ultimate endgame revolves around hunting down terrifying, massive dragons across different biomes, requiring you and your crew to craft high-tier armor, prepare specific stat-boosting meals, and set up fast travel lodestones across the wilderness so you don't get stranded in a wasteland when you inevitably wipe. Yes, the infamous horse armor is back in full force, and yes, the NPCs still look like they were sculpted out of wet clay by someone who had only ever heard a vague description of a human being. But now they do it in stunning high-definition lighting. The absolute best part of this remaster is that they left the iconic janky Radiant AI untouched. If you played the original, you know exactly what I mean watching two townspeople have a deeply intense conversation about mud crabs, abruptly scream in terror because a stray dog walked by, and then immediately go back to talking about the local economy like nothing happened. It is pure comedy gold, and seeing those glitchy overlapping dialogue loops play out with modern textures and crisp updated draw distances makes Cyrodiil feel incredibly nostalgic but somehow fresh. The team over at Virtuos touched up the combat, smoothed out the frame rates, and made casting spells while swinging a two-handed warhammer feel significantly less clunky than it did 20 years ago. You're still getting out of the Imperial sewers after watching Patrick Stewart get assassinated in the first 10 minutes, you're still closing terrifying red portals across the countryside, and you're still getting lost in the absolute perfection of the Dark Brotherhood and Shivering Isles quest lines. It's an incredibly weird mix of modern visual polish and mid-2000s video game jank, but honestly, if they had fixed the broken AI or made the physics look normal, it wouldn't be Oblivion anymore. It's proof that sometimes you don't need a total reimagining, you just need to make the old glorious nonsense run at a smooth 60 frames per second. Elden Ring is pretty much the game that collectively broke the entire gaming community's brain by proving that an open world doesn't need to look like an aggressive Excel spreadsheet covered in multicolored icons to keep you hooked. FromSoftware basically dropped you into a massive, gorgeous, decaying land, pointed at a giant glowing tree in the distance, and said, "Good luck, you're going to die a lot." You start out as a nameless, broke, weaponless loser who gets immediately stomped into the dirt by a giant golden knight on a horse within 30 seconds of leaving the tutorial area, and that sets the tone for the next 80 hours of your life. The magic here is the sheer level of freedom you have to tackle that absolute misery. If a boss is thoroughly kicking your teeth in, you don't just bash your head against the wall until you break through, you just turn around, hop on your spectral goat horse Torrent, and ride off into a different direction to find a hidden cave, a floating ruined city, or an underground cosmic river. You might find a giant magic sword, or a spell that lets you summon a clone of yourself, or a piece of armor that makes you look like an angry pot. The variety of builds is ridiculous, allowing you to play as a heavy armored knight, a sneaky assassin, or a wizard who shoots literal laser beams out of their forehead. It's a game built entirely on the joy of discovery and the terrifying thrill of turning a corner, only to realize you've stepped into the arena of a multi-phase demigod who wants to slice you into ribbons to a beautiful orchestral soundtrack. Now, if you're looking for a strategy game that moves at a different pace, something that requires actual brain power instead of just rapid-fire clicking, Brigandine Abyss is exactly that flavor of old-school tactical goodness that modern developers usually skip. It runs on this incredibly satisfying two-phase gameplay that splits your time between playing an armchair general and a fantasy accountant. First, you've got the organization phase, where you're looking at a giant map of the continent, managing your gold, recruiting mythical monsters like dragons and ghouls, and positioning your rune knights across different strongholds. Then comes the invasion phase, where you actually launch your troops onto a massive hexagonal grid and engage in these incredibly tense, turn-based skirmishes against rival factions like the Abyssloa Empire. The tactical depth here is absolutely immense, because you're not only managing human soldiers, you're managing the squad composition of monsters that have their own elemental strengths, terrain bonuses, and upkeep costs. If you position a fire dragon on a mountain tile, it's going to absolutely wreck anything that comes near it, but if you get surrounded or let your commanding rune knight get knocked out, your entire monster squad panics and leaves you exposed. Losing a high-level monster you spent 10 hours keeping alive feels like losing a real-life pet, which adds this layer of geometric anxiety to every single hex movement you make. The narrative follows different rulers like Largo or Garnet across multiple distinct campaigns, giving you different political perspectives on the war depending on who you choose to fight for. Trails in the Sky second chapter is the full 3D modern reimagining of the classic SC, built on the gorgeous Daybreak engine, and it hits like an absolute freight train. We pick up immediately where we left off, following our newly certified senior bracer Estelle Bright as she embarks on a continent-spanning search for her adoptive brother and partner Joshua, who vanished into the night, leaving nothing behind but his emotional baggage and a literal harmonica. The core plot revolves around hunting down Ouroboros, a shadowy, sinister, secret society that is trying to plunge the entire liberal kingdom into total chaos, using massive airships and ancient technology. Now, Falcom didn't just give this thing a massive coat of visual paint, they completely overhauled the gameplay with a slick, hybrid combat system that lets you swap between traditional turn-based tactical grids and real-time action maneuvers depending on how fast you want to clear out aggressive local wildlife. The level of detail here is genuinely staggering because the developers brought over the legendary continuity the series is known for. Every single unnamed NPC in every town has a fully realized life story that updates after every major plot beat. You will easily burn 20 hours just chatting with the local baker and his wife instead of actually saving the world. On top of that, you've got a mountain of side content like hyper-addictive fishing minigames, high-stakes poker tables, and cooking mechanics that actually reward you for hanging out with your party members. The combat upgrade is the real star here, giving you crazy new synergy options and chain attacks that make taking down giant mechanical bosses feel incredibly rewarding rather than a repetitive grind. FromSoftware and Hidetaka Miyazaki are apparently done playing nice because their upcoming Switch 2 project, the Duskbloods, is an absolute wild curveball that merges their signature dark atmosphere with an intense 8-player multiplayer arena. You are dropping into a ruined apocalyptic timeline called the Twilight of Humanity, playing as a Bloodsworn, which is essentially a gothic vampire-like warrior empowered by supernatural blood running through their veins. The gameplay ditches the massive open-world exploration of Elden Ring and traps you in these highly vertical, chaotic arenas where you're actively fighting both twisted ambient monsters and 7 other cutthroat players to collect victory points and claim first blood. It features an incredibly unique, dynamic rivalry system where the match can suddenly assign you a destined rival, which means the game explicitly points at another player across the map and gives you a massive bonus if you go track them down and ruin their night. True to FromSoftware fashion. The lore isn't handed to you in cutscenes, instead, it's literally baked into the customization menus where altering your character's blood history changes your stats, your abilities, and your visual design, while slowly piecing together the horrifying history of the world.
There was a land called Hyrule, created by beings of supreme
Nintendo dropped that absolute megaton bomb of an announcement teaser at the June Direct, but they didn't actually give us a single second of real raw link-swinging A-sword gameplay footage, leaving the entire gaming community to operate on pure unadulterated speculation. Instead of a deep dive walkthrough, we got a brief cinematic glimpse that flexed a stunningly detailed, slightly realistic new art style, proving that Nintendo is completely dodging the colorful, cel-shaded look of recent titles to deliver something that looks exactly how your nostalgic 1998 brain thought the original N64 classic looked when you were a kid. Just seeing that quick pan with dense volumetric lighting was enough to cause a global meltdown of internet bandwidth, but because we didn't see any actual UI, combat mechanics, or dungeon layouts, fans are already tearing each other apart online.
Okay everyone, thanks so much for watching. If you liked that video, please leave a like and subscribe, and ring the bell if you want to get notified when we release new content. We hope to see you in the next video.